All right, ready to get real about love. We're ditching the rom-com cliches today and going deep with philosopher Alan Watts.
Definitely not your typical Valentine's Day special.
No, not at all. He has this talk that dives into the psychology of love, and some of his ideas are, well, let's just say they might surprise you.
Yeah, he kind of flips the script on that whole love is selfless thing. He actually starts by talking about, get this, fake love.
Fake love. Like pretending to like someone's casserole when you secretly hate it.
Well, kinda. But Watts is talking about something deeper. The kind of love that's built on resentment, on trying to force what isn't really there. And he uses this unexpected example of foreign aid programs.
Okay, now that's an interesting connection. What do foreign aid programs have to do with fake love?
So think about how often those programs fail. Watts argues it's because they often try to impose values and ways of life onto other cultures.
So it's like, even with good intentions, it's not really love if you're coming from a place of, I know what's best for you.
Yeah, exactly. It becomes more about control than genuine understanding. And Watts says that kind of dynamic, that fake love, it breeds resentment, on both sides. Like, have you ever felt pressure to love something or someone a certain way? And it backfires.
Oh, yeah, totally. It makes me think about, like, those times when someone tries to force you to like a certain band or movie, and you just end up resenting it even more.
Exactly. It's like trying to force a square peg into a round hole. It just doesn't work. So Watts says to get to real love, genuine love, you have to start with honesty. And that means being honest with ourselves, even if it means admitting, that we can be kind of selfish sometimes.
So before we even think about loving someone else, we need to figure out this whole self-love thing.
Yeah, he really emphasizes that. But he also says it's tricky because the self, who we are, it's always changing. It's like trying to grab smoke. The harder you try to define it, the more it slips away.
Okay, now that's a head scratcher. How can you love something that you can't even pin down?
Well, think about the things you love about yourself. What are you drawn to? Most likely, it's experiences, connections, things that are, outside of you.
You're right. Like, I love learning new things, traveling to new places, connecting with people who inspire me.
Exactly. And Watts points this out because it shows that even self-love is about recognizing something other than yourself.
So even in self-love, there's this element of reaching beyond ourselves.
Yeah. And that leads us to his big idea about love being an act of surrender.
Okay, surrender. That's a pretty loaded word. What exactly does he mean by that?
He says real love is about letting things get out of control. It's about surrendering to the other person, letting go of that need to control everything.
That sounds a little terrifying, to be honest. Like, are we talking, first date territory here, or?
Well, he applies it to any kind of love, but yeah, it's definitely relevant in romantic relationships. He acknowledges that this idea of surrender sounds crazy to a lot of people.
Right. We're always told to protect ourselves, be careful, especially in matters of the heart. So why is he saying surrender is a good thing?
He argues that trying to maintain constant control actually creates more problems. It leads to tension, to suspicion, to constantly walking on eggshells.
That makes sense. If you're always on guard, always analyzing, are you really open to actually experiencing love?
Right. And Watts compares falling in love to, this is interesting, the act of creation.
Creation, like painting or writing a song.
Yeah, or even, building something. He's saying both involve this, as he calls it, ghastly risk, this leap of faith into the unknown.
Okay, I can see that. You're putting yourself out there, not knowing how it'll turn out.
Right.
And that can be scary.
And he compares that to love. Like every step we take, every relationship we enter, it requires that same kind of faith. We trust the ground won't disappear beneath us, and we have to have that trust in love too, even when the stakes are higher.
So even those everyday things we do, they require a little bit of trust, a little bit of surrender. And when it comes to love, we're just upping the ante.
Exactly. And we tend to romanticize falling in love. But if you really think about it, it is kind of a crazy thing to do. Yeah. You're letting someone in, giving them a piece of your heart with no guarantee how it'll turn out.
It's like that free fall feeling where you just have to trust that you'll land safely.
Yeah. And Watts is saying that's where the beauty lies, in that surrender, that willingness to take the risk.
Okay, so we've got this idea of fake love, the need for honesty, and now this whole surrender thing. And he's saying all of this is important even before we start talking about those, hearts and flowers feelings.
It's like he's laying the groundwork for understanding what real lasting love actually requires.
Okay, I'm definitely intrigued. So what does he say happens once we've, tackled all of this? How do we actually find that real love?
Well, that's where it gets even more interesting. He starts talking about expanding our understanding of what love even is. He says, forget those categories of good love, bad love, spiritual love, material love.
So he's not a fan of labels.
He says it's all part of one spectrum. Like, imagine light going through a prism.
So instead of putting love in boxes, he's saying it's more fluid, it can express itself in all sorts of ways. Like what kind of ways?
Well, he talks about things like libido, friendship, even like divine love, all as different expressions of that same energy.
Whoa, okay, so you're telling me like the butterflies you get on a first date are on the same spectrum as, say, the love you feel for your best friend? Or even something bigger, like love for humanity.
Exactly. And that's where those selfish desires that we talked about earlier come back into play. You know, Watts isn't saying be a narcissist, but he's saying even loving a delicious meal can be a starting point.
Hold on, are we seriously comparing love for a person to love for a plate of pasta now?
Well, think about it. When you really enjoy something, even something simple like a great meal, you're acknowledging something other than yourself that brings you pleasure. You're opening yourself up to connection, even if it's just with like a really good pizza.
Okay, I can kind of see that. So it's like recognizing what you love, even the, seemingly small stuff, helps you expand your capacity for love in general.
Exactly. And Watts argues that's how we move from like those more selfish forms of love to a broader, more expansive kind of love. It's not about denying those desires, but recognizing what they tell us about ourselves, about how we connect to the world around us.
So it's kind of like a stepping stone. You figure out what you love, even if it's just a hobby or a certain type of music, and that teaches you something about how you love in general.
It's like building a muscle. The more you practice recognizing what brings you joy, what creates that feeling of connection, the stronger your capacity for love becomes. And then that can extend outwards to other people, to causes you're passionate about, even to, the world as a whole.
That's actually a pretty hopeful way to look at it.
Yeah.
But I got to admit, this whole surrender thing still feels kind of scary, like especially when it comes to, romantic love. How do you balance that with protecting yourself?
That's a really great question. And Watts definitely acknowledges that surrender can feel risky. But he argues that trying to control love is ultimately more damaging in the long run. Remember that dam analogy he uses?
Oh, yeah, where if you try to dam up a river, eventually it'll overflow and cause all sorts of destruction. He's saying that's what happens when we try to control love.
Exactly. It's like you can try to force a river to flow in a straight line for a while, but eventually nature's going to take over. And it's the same with love.
So are you saying we should just throw all caution to the wind and just let love do whatever it wants? I mean, isn't there some kind of middle ground here?
I don't think Watts is saying to be reckless, but it's about being honest with yourself and with your partner. It's about communication. It's about building trust. And it's about being willing to be vulnerable.
Okay, that makes more sense. So it's not about being passive. It's about being open, being honest about your needs, your expectations, but also being willing to let go of some of that need for control.
And remembering that love, like that river, is constantly flowing and changing. There will be calm stretches and there will be rapids. The key is learning to navigate those changes together.
It's interesting. He uses a lot of nature analogies when he talks about love. Like, besides the dam, he also talks about how trying to love yourself is like a dog chasing its tail.
Yeah.
You can never quite catch it.
Right, because that idea of self is always evolving. It's shaped by our experiences, our relationships, everything around us.
So how do you even begin to love yourself if you can't pin down who that self is?
Watts would probably say it's less about defining yourself and more about accepting that you're constantly changing and growing. It's about embracing all those different facets of yourself, even the parts that are, messy or imperfect.
And maybe that's the key to loving others too, right? Accepting that they're also complex and ever-changing.
Absolutely. It goes back to that idea of recognizing the otherness in someone, but seeing it as something that connects us rather than separates us. Instead of trying to fit someone into a box or, mold them to our expectations, we allow them the space to be themselves, to evolve and to grow.
So it's less about finding someone who perfectly matches us and more about finding someone who can grow and change alongside us.
Exactly. And that requires a willingness to let go of control, to accept that there will be bumps along the way.
This whole conversation is making me think about how much of our society is built on trying to control things, especially in relationships. Like we have all these rules and expectations about how love should be.
It's true. And Watts would argue that those rigid expectations are often the root of the problem. They set us up for disappointment because real love is messy, it's unpredictable, and it's constantly evolving.
I mean, think about all the rom-coms we watch, right? They always end with the couple riding off into the sunset, happily ever after. But what about the day-to-day challenges, the arguments, the compromises?
Those are all part of it, too. And I think Watts would say those challenges, those ghastly risks, as he calls them, are actually what make love so powerful and so transformative.
So it's like by embracing those challenges, by allowing ourselves to be vulnerable and surrender to the unknown, we're actually opening ourselves up to a deeper, more authentic experience of love.
And that's what he's ultimately advocating for. A world where love is not about control, it's not about perfection, but it's about acceptance, it's about vulnerability, and it's about a willingness to let go.
That's a beautiful thought, but also kind of terrifying, right? It goes against everything we've been taught about love.
It's definitely a challenge, but I think Watts would say it's a challenge worth taking on. Because the alternative, a world where love is stifled and controlled, is ultimately far more destructive.
Okay, I'm starting to see the bigger picture here, but how do we even begin to shift our perspective on love so drastically? I mean, it feels so ingrained in our culture to try to control things, especially in relationships.
Well, maybe it starts with recognizing those patterns in ourselves. When we find ourselves trying to control a situation or a person, maybe we can just pause for a second, ask ourselves, is this really serving me, or am I just afraid to let go?
It's like being mindful of those moments when we're trying to, dam up the river, so to speak.
Exactly. And remembering that Watts says suppressing love, any form of love, ultimately leads to self-destruction. It's that dam analogy all over again, that water's got to go somewhere.
So if trying to control love is destructive, what does Watts propose as a healthier alternative? What does a world that embraces the messiness of love actually look like?
Well, that's where he gets really philosophical, but also surprisingly practical. He talks about the importance of honesty, and not just honesty with others, but honesty with ourselves.
So we're back to that idea of self-awareness, really understanding what we want, what we need.
Exactly. And then being willing to communicate those needs to others, even if it feels, a little bit vulnerable or messy.
And that's where the trust piece comes in, right? Being able to trust that the other person will meet us where we are without judgment.
Exactly. And that's not always easy. It takes courage. It takes a willingness to be open, even when it feels scary.
This is all making me think back to those negative patterns we talked about earlier, like fake love and trying to force things. Is Watts suggesting that all love has the potential to become something more authentic, more fulfilling?
I think he is. And he keeps pointing back to that spectrum of love. He sees all those different expressions, from libido to friendship to divine love, as part of the same fundamental energy.
So it's not about judging one type of love as better or worse than another, but recognizing that they're all part of the same interconnected web.
Exactly. And maybe by embracing that interconnectedness, by recognizing that we're all capable of loving and being loved in so many different ways, we can start to shift our perspective on what love truly means.
Okay, my brain is doing backflips trying to process all of this. But it's definitely making me think about love in a whole new light.
It's so empowering, right? And also kind of scary, but necessary.
It is. It takes courage to walk away from something that's not serving you, even when you have feelings for someone.
That's so true. And it kind of brings us back to the whole idea of self-love, doesn't it?
100%. He really emphasizes that self-love is the foundation for everything.
Okay, so we've got admiration, mutual attraction, and commitment. What's the final level?
The final level is all about compatibility.
Ah, compatibility. Now that's a big one. But, if you've already reached that commitment stage, doesn't that imply you're compatible?
That's a great question. And it's something a lot of people assume. But you can definitely be committed to building a relationship with someone and still not be truly compatible.
Okay, so what does true compatibility actually look like then?
Think of it as this: ease. It's about having this natural alignment in terms of your values, your lifestyles, your goals for the future.
It's about feeling like you can truly be yourself without having to constantly compromise or pretend.
Exactly. Right. So compatibility isn't about being exactly the same. It's about finding someone whose strengths and, quirks mesh well with yours.
I love that. I think Watts would be pretty happy to know that we're having this conversation, that we're willing to challenge our assumptions and explore these complex ideas.
So we've covered fake love, the importance of honesty and self-awareness, and this radical idea of surrender. What else does Watts have in store for us? Where do we go from here?
I think Watts would say the next step is to, take all of this and actually put it into practice.
Yeah, it's one thing to, like, talk about these ideas, but it's a whole other thing to actually live them out, in our relationships and our everyday lives.
Exactly. So how do we bridge that gap? How do we go from theory to reality?
Right. Like, what does embracing the messiness of love actually look like, day to day?
Well, maybe it starts with something as simple as being more present with the people we care about.
More present. Okay, so like putting down our phones when we're with our partner, really listening to what they have to say.
Yeah, that's a great start. Instead of trying to, control the conversation or plan out your next point, just focus on being there in the moment.
Really tuning into what they're saying, what they're feeling.
Exactly. And it's also about being honest about our own needs and desires, even if they feel kind of messy or complicated.
Okay, so that vulnerability piece we were talking about, letting go of the need to present this, perfect, polished version of ourselves.
Yeah, just being real, flaws and all.
And trusting that the other person will accept us, even the parts we don't always love about ourselves.
Right. That's a big part of it, that trust.
Okay, but what about when conflicts come up? Because, let's be real, disagreements are kind of inevitable in any relationship.
Yeah.
How do we navigate those without falling back into those patterns of, trying to control things or getting resentful?
That's a good question. And I think Watts would say those conflicts are actually opportunities for growth.
Oh, interesting. So instead of seeing an argument as, like, a bad thing, we should see it as a chance to, learn something.
Yeah, it's in those moments of friction that we really learn about ourselves and our partners.
So it's a chance to understand each other better, maybe even strengthen the bond.
Exactly. It's about remembering that even when you disagree, you're on the same team.
Okay, that's a really helpful way to reframe it. It's like, instead of viewing conflict as a threat, we can see it as an opportunity to build something stronger together.
And I think that's what Watts is ultimately getting at, that love is not this static, unchanging thing, but it's a dynamic process.
It's about constantly learning, adapting, evolving together.
Exactly. It's not about finding that, perfect, effortless love, but it's about embracing the journey, even the parts that are messy or challenging.
And I think that's a much more realistic and ultimately more fulfilling way to think about love.
Yeah, I agree.
It's funny, we started this whole deep dive talking about fake love, and now we're here talking about the power of real love to, transform us in our relationships.
It's been quite a journey.
It really has. And I think Watts would be thrilled that we've come full circle. He really believed that love, in its purest form, has the power to not only heal individuals, but the world as a whole. It's a powerful thought. So if we're all capable of this kind of, transformative love, why does there seem to be so much conflict and division in the world?
I think Watts would say that a lot of the suffering we see comes from a lack of understanding and acceptance.
Like we build up these walls around ourselves, our communities, and we fear what we don't know.
Yeah, exactly. And those walls prevent us from experiencing those deeper connections that love can bring.
So they keep us isolated and afraid, which leads to, all those negative things, anger, resentment, even violence.
Right. If we want to create a more loving and peaceful world, I think we need to start by breaking down those walls.
And how do we do that? Where do we even begin?
It starts with each of us, individually. It's about being willing to step outside our comfort zones, challenge our own biases, and connect with people who are different from us.
It's about recognizing that otherness we keep talking about and realizing that it's actually what connects us all.
We're all part of the same human family, even with all our differences. And when we embrace that interconnectedness, that's when real change is possible.
And the key is to remember that personal growth and self-discovery are an ongoing journey.
Yeah, it doesn't end just because you're in a relationship.
In fact, it becomes even more important.
Yeah.
And that brings us to the big takeaway from this whole deep dive.
Okay, let's hear it.
It's not just about finding a partner. It's about becoming the best version of yourself, so you can attract and build a fulfilling relationship.
There's someone who truly gets you.
Exactly.
I feel like my brain just got, a relationship upgrade.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in.
It is, but it's so good, right? I mean, understanding these 4 levels is like having a whole new lens to look at relationships.
It's true. And, it's not just for people who are, actively dating or looking for someone.
Right.
Even if you're already in a committed relationship.
Yeah.
Revisiting these levels can be, a great way to spark some interesting conversations with your partner.
Totally, yeah, because relationships are always evolving, right? It's not like you just reach a certain point and then everything stays the same forever.
Exactly.
So having these checkpoints can help you, figure out where you are and where you want to go,
Makes sense.
both individually and as a couple.
And don't forget, it all comes back to self-love.
Right, right.
Like the more you understand your own needs and your own worth, the better equipped you are to create a relationship that's truly fulfilling.
So true. Okay, I have a question for everyone listening.
Hit me.
What level do you think you're currently at in your own romantic life?
Ooh, good one.
And what level are you aiming for? Like, take a moment to really think about that, because it might bring up some surprising insights.
It might. And remember, there's no right or wrong answer.
Right, for sure.
Every level has something to teach us.
And, if you're out there and you're finding yourself stuck at level 2.
Mutual attraction stage.
Yes. All those butterflies and excitement.
Mm.
Remember Audrey's bold move. Sometimes you need to set those boundaries and walk away from something that's not truly serving you.
Even if it's hard.
Even if it's tough, yeah. Because ultimately, you deserve to be in a relationship that makes you happy.
100%.
Okay, so in that spirit, I want to invite all of you amazing listeners to join our deep dive community. We love having you here.
We do. It's so great to have you all along for the ride.
So whether you're at level 1, level 4, or somewhere in between, we hope this deep dive has given you some food for thought.
And remember, the journey of self-discovery never ends.
Keep exploring, keep learning.
Keep diving deep.
And most importantly, keep believing in the power of love.
Cheers to that.
Thanks for joining us.